Hey, 150. It's episode 150. I'm just going to start right off and say that we should have hearings into the response to the coronavirus right fucking now. Because, well, for Benghazi, where 4 people died, we had 10 or 11 hearings, and they went on for 3 years. But this thing is going on right now. It may subside if we do the proper social distancing and if warmer summer weather makes it take a lull, but then it's going to come screaming right back in the fall and winter, and we should figure out what we did right and wrong right fucking away. Because if Trump's saying, and the Republicans are saying that Trump was distracted by being impeached in January when this thing started up, how distracted is everybody going to fucking be in November right before the election when this shit comes back? So we need to have fucking hearings right now to figure out what we did right, what we did wrong, and so we can face it in September, October, November.
All right. Can you mute?
Yeah.
All right. I think the most important thing that will be determined from all this is that the virus goes to from a certain population to another population. And so the most important thing is that Trump instituted the travel ban to China, which was revolutionary at the time. I've never heard of that. I've never heard of a giant country that we have huge trading ties with getting quarantined by us. And that will be the thing that stops the spread the most. So he did that within 2 or 3 weeks of the first case, or I think death in the United States. So he was right on it. Had he done that, earlier than that, people would have thought he was overreacting. The second thing I want to say is that, pursuant to my earlier point, that it goes from one population to another population, we need to realize that half of the United States' deaths are from New York City. For those of you that aren't following, today's April the 5th, and it turns out that in California, there are roughly 350 deaths from coronavirus. 350 for the whole state. Now, California has 3 million people in it. So to me, if you only have 340 deaths in California, as opposed to about 5,000 in New York, I think just as we quarantine China, we may as well just quarantine New York and open up the rest of the country. Because clearly it hasn't got much of a foothold in the rest of the country. You can go now.
All right. So I've got all the statistics up, and so about 44% of the deaths so far are out of New York. But when you look at total cases, 30 states have more than 1,000 cases right now. No state has fewer than 185 cases, and that's fucking Alaska. 40 states have more than 500 cases. And some states, like Florida, is going to peak. They're saying California is going to peak in May. Most cases, most daily deaths. Florida is set up to have a huge number of cases because they didn't social quarantine in time, and they'll peak in June or July. The deal is that to some extent the U.S. is 50 different countries because every state has different policies and different behaviors and different populations. And there's still 9 or 10 states that have not issued a statewide stay-at-home order. And a lot of states are still letting churches have have services with a shitload of people getting together, and next week is Easter, and if those states don't shut it down, they'll have Easter congregating. So yeah, New York right now is the source of nearly half of the deaths in the U.S. and just under 40% of the total cases, but other states are coming up and will eventually generate big numbers. So, you know, similar to the way Trump issued a travel ban, though not a complete travel ban, since he issued the ban, 40,000 people have managed to get into the U.S. from China. So it wasn't a complete ban. But it was already too late because the virus was already here. And the deal is you can't put a quarantine on New York because the U.S. has 337 total confirmed cases, probably twice that unconfirmed, but only 123 of them are in New York. That leaves 220 cases spread out across the rest of the U.S. with fucking 10 states with more than 11,000 confirmed cases. So it's fucking all over the place. So as somebody said, some epidemiologist associated with the White House, I think it may have been Fauci, said 3 weeks ago that the containment phase is over. It's the mitigation phase that we're in now, which is social distancing. And if you want to talk about it, we can talk about a hydroxychloroquine. Nope, that's not how you say it. But anyway, I'll come up with.
Well, can I respond?
Yeah.
All right. So I've been reading articles, like everyone has, and there are two issues that I think are very important. The first is that nobody knows what the ratio of getting it to dying from it is. Nobody knows that. And the reason no one knows that is because we haven't tested enough people. Now, since this call for testing has arisen, the United States has now tested 1.5 million people. So we're doing the best we can in testing. But this is a mathematical equation that I hope intrigues Rick or beguiles him. If one person gets it, we've had about up until today, we've had about 85, maybe 9,000 deaths. All right, so 9,000 deaths in the U.S. Some people say 9,500, some people say 8,500. But if 100 million of us have already been infected, then that means that the rate of death is minuscule, and we should just relax. Then it would be something like 0.01 or less that die. If, on the other hand, only 200,000 people have it and 10,000 people die, well, then that's very significant. So my point is that we don't know how many people have had it. We don't know if 25% of the country has it. Maybe 60 million people have it. We don't know. So there's no way to determine what your odds of getting it and dying from it are. There's no way of determining, well, either of those, whether you get it or whether you die from it.
Okay,
So wait, there's more. The second thing I wanted to say is that I'm getting an echo. Did you?
I unmuted, so fucking just start.
Can you mute? All right. So I wanted to say something else. Now, I read an article by Victor Davis Hanson, and he said something very interesting. He said that a lot of people were presenting, that means showing symptoms of an unusual kind of flu in California in January. And really, there's no explanation why California would only have 350 deaths so far, when New York has got about 4,000 or 5,000. And what Victor Davis Hanson is implying is that maybe the population of California has already developed antibodies. Maybe we've already got what is known as herd immunity, because we have more visitors from China to California than they do to New York. So maybe we already got it, in which case we may as well open up the country again. And my final thing I'm going to say, and then I'll let you go. Mute. My final thing is, maybe we could isolate the states that are doing okay and just quarantine them. Just say, look, no more people from New York get to come here, but we're going to go back to having a good economy. All right, go ahead, Rick.
All right. Who is Victor David Hanson?
He's a Stanford professor. He's a professor at Stanford.
All right, so the deal is we've tested 1.77 million people. 1.77 million people in the U.S., just over 0.5%. And you're right, you can't tell, whether the fatality rate is 1% or 2% or 3%. Right now, based on confirmed U.S. cases, the fatality rate in the U.S. is roughly 2.6, 2.7%. But you can tell, you can look at other countries that have tested more of their people and to get a better idea of how low the fatality rate might be, and it's not 0.01%. You look at South Korea, which is celebrated for really getting in with the testing early. So they've had about 10,000 cases and under 200 deaths. So their fatality rate is under 2%. You look at other countries that have tested a larger segment of their population. Germany has done well with testing. They've had 100,000 cases and 1,600 deaths for a 1.6% fatality rate. Can't go off of Italy because shit got control there, but Switzerland, 21,000 cases, super high testing rate, 715 deaths, which is a 3.5% fatality rate. So the idea that there are 60 million Americans who already have it is not supportable, though it's possible that with 1/3 confirmed cases that we do have 1 million people out there who have it, with people estimate between 25 and 50% of those people being asymptomatic, but not 60 million. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying. Well, all I'm saying is that there may be a lot of people that have already recovered from it. There may be 1 million people that had it and recovered, and now have antibodies. And by the way, those people that have antibodies to the virus have already provided a cure to people that have severe symptoms. They've already done tests. They've taken antibodies out of the cured the people that somehow survived it, and they've already cured people with that. So we already have one known cure with using antibodies of people that have survived the virus.
Yeah, well, that's an artisanal cure. You've got to find somebody who's survived the fucking virus. You got to pull the serum out of them, and then you have to. It's not a it's not a way to provide protection for millions of people. Because I mean, making the vaccine, when we finally get the vaccine, is going to be an industrial process where you need to grow it in chicken eggs. And that, again, is like an industrial thing. But this is, so serum immunity, while good, to get it so it cures a bunch of people, I don't know if that's even logistically feasible. But let's talk about hydrochloroquine. There are some small studies beginning to leak out. One out of, I'm not saying leak because they're secret, but they're just trickling out. There was a double-blind study of 62 people out of China. 31 people got hydrochloroquine, 31 people got the regular set of therapies, and there was some indication that it was better than the regular therapies. Not necessarily a slam dunk, but out of the 31 who got the hydrochloroquine, 25 improved, while 17 improved on the regular therapies. The people who got the hydrochloroquine showed a reduction of symptoms in 2 days versus 3 days for people who got the other therapies. Then these were people who weren't that sick initially. Another study of 10 or 11 people out of some other there was also a problem with understanding the study because it was written in Mandarin, so there were translation problems. Study of 10 or 11 people who were more seriously ill where the hydrochloroquine didn't make anybody more significantly better than otherwise. There's also the narrow therapeutic window where I'm looking at a tweet here where Chief of Infectious Disease at a Swedish hospital, which has stopped using it because patients experience cramps, headaches, and peripheral blindness. So there's a small window where you can give people hydrochloroquine to make them better, but there's also the risk if you give them more than that, or maybe even that amount, that they'll get brutal side effects. But anyway, it's as I said last week, it's possible that it will help some, but it's still early days on it. Okay.
Well, my understanding of the hydrochloroquine is that it's safe unless you have a heart condition. I am not familiar with this Swedish result, but not only is it safe, but it's been used for 70 years for malaria. It's a fairly common drug. I've met somebody that took it because they were going overseas and they needed to prepare for malaria. So hydroxychloroquine is not known to be blinding people because it's an extremely common drug. And one of the things that President Trump has been saying is that we know that it's safe. So I don't know why these Swedish people were blinding each other with it, but we're certain that hydroxychloroquine is a safe drug, or by now, hundreds of thousands of people going to countries with malaria would be dead or blinded, according to the Swedes. Another thing I wanted to say is that I checked the Center for Disease Control before we did the show, and it said that hydroxychloroquine is right now being used for patients that are in the severe state of coronavirus illness. So it's being used for mild, medium, and severe. Might work better for the mild cases. That's up to the doctors on the site to figure out, whether maybe there's nothing you can do once somebody gets to the point where they're near death. But Trump mentioned something very interesting today. He said that, and they've known this for a couple of weeks, actually. Actually, the very first Chinese study stated that the lupus patients See, hydroxychloroquine is actually used for lupus. And so there are people that have lupus and they habitually have to take it. By the way, they're not going blind. And what happens is the Chinese noticed that none of them were getting coronavirus. So they because of that, they began to feel that taking hydroxychloroquine could actually prevent you from getting coronavirus. It could actually work as a vaccine. And that's what I've been aware of this for a while, but Trump reiterated it this morning. He actually said he might take it just for its preventative effects. So that brings me to the most interesting point. To me, there are two things that I want to raise before Rick takes over the mic, because we can't interrupt each other, thank God. The first is, why did the U.S. media, why did the Washington Post and the New York Times use the words that Trump was a snake oil salesman? They called him a snake oil salesman a month ago when he first mentioned this. And there are now massive doses of hydroxychloroquine being sent to every hospital in the United States. Every hospital and every pharmacy is getting doses of it. So apparently he wasn't a snake oil salesman, and I resent the Democrats brainwashing Rick at the very beginning a month ago, and every Democrat I know, by telling them it wasn't going to work. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I want to bring this up later, but just so I don't forget, is that I think the Chinese did this possibly on purpose. At the very least, it's the worst accident since Chernobyl. All right, go ahead.
All right, people who say that this is a fucking engineered virus are fucking retarded. I'm sorry to retarded people to use that, but that shit like this happens every few decades. There was a 1957 H2N2 flu pandemic that killed 70 to 100,000 Americans, 1 million to 4 million people worldwide. There was the one that everybody knows about, the 1918, 1919 Spanish flu. This shit has been going on every few decades as long as we've been keeping track of this shit. And certainly we haven't had the technology to engineer a virus. You know, we didn't, before we even knew there were viruses. This shit happens, especially in these wet markets. This thing came from people fucking caging, harvesting bats for people to eat in horrifying recipes. Anyway, the chloroquine. 1.5 million lupus patients in the United States, many of whom take this stuff, and many of whom are saying they can't get their prescriptions filled because this stuff is being gobbled up by people who think they can use it to either fight corona once they have it, or to as a prophylactic to prevent themselves from getting it. And that's a particularly dangerous statement, that if people start taking it in mass because they think it'll help them fight off the virus, then you get all these...
Hang on.
No, wait.
Hang on. I didn't hear your last lie. People start taking it in mass. What?
If tens of millions of people who don't necessarily have coronavirus and don't want to get it start trying to get a hold of it because Trump says he might try it to see if it stops him from getting it, then that will lead to a severe shortage for the people who have been taking it month after month, year after year for lupus and other diseases. So anyway, I found this article that says there is no study proving that lupus patients don't get coronavirus because they take chloroquine. And in fact, so there's a sorry, my eyes are goopy, but there's a there's a COVID-19 Global Rheumatology Alliance. And it says that it's too early to make any definitive conclusions in rheumatology patients, which is people with arthritis and stuff who are taking hydrochloroquine. And the data so far shows that lupus patients do, in fact, get COVID-19. Many of them were taking hydrochloroquine at the time of their diagnosis. The registry has data on 110 patients. Most patients have rheumatoid arthritis, 36%, followed by psoriasis and lupus at 17% each. And all these people got the COVID. So early evidence says that having already been on it doesn't stop you from getting it. But again, it's early days, and that's what I've been saying the whole time, which is, you know, this thing, it feels like we've been doing this forever now, but we in California have only been seriously quarantined for about 3 weeks. And this shit wasn't known in America until early January. So it's only 3 months later. So in terms of figuring out whether this shit works, it's what I've been saying, where, you know, we need to figure out whether it's going to work and in what instances. So, Diana, what do you want to talk about? That's it. Okay.
All right. Well, Rick raised 2 issues. The first, since it's fresh in your minds, is the shortages of hydroxychloroquine. The first is that was a fear that the Democrats had started. Governor Cuomo, for example, made it illegal to prescribe hydroxychloroquine. And in doing so, I'm sure he killed a few New Yorkers. Not something that would bother a Democrat. But he also released prisoners, too. That's another thing. He released prisoners from jails because he was afraid of hydroxychloroquine. I mean, he was afraid of coronavirus infection spreading in the jails. So he released prisoners, some of whom were actual murderers, child molesters, early. I don't know about the murderers, but I know about the rapists. Anyway, so some of the Democrat governors, one in Michigan and one in New York, made it illegal to prescribe hydroxychloroquine. I'm just going to call it chloroquine from now on. But that situation was remedied almost immediately. There are now 130 million doses of hydroxychloroquine either promised to the U.S. in the next few days or already here. All right, so we have enough hydroxychloroquine at this point to treat millions of Americans. Thankfully, it's a very easy drug to produce for our drug companies. We were donated 15 million doses by Bayer and by the Nation of Israel 2 weeks ago. So we have plenty. So we have plenty. So the fear that people are going to take all this there'll be a big shortage is completely and utterly unfounded. As far as the study that you say that lupus patients still get the virus, well, we have a study that says they don't get the virus. Now, I don't know what we can believe from China.
Show me the study. I'm muting myself.
Rick, it's a Chinese study. It's the study that they released when they gave it to us, when they started talking with the Italians about it in the very beginning. I'm not Johns Hopkins Hospital here, Rick, so I can't give you the study. It's not in my ass right now. if that's okay, Rick. Am I muted?
I'm looking at an article that says there is no such study, and that offers an actual set of statistics that indicates that it doesn't taking it doesn't stop you from catching COVID.
Okay, mute. I'm still talking. All right. Okay, well, I'm saying that your study doesn't include the study that I heard about. So if you want to believe that study, then I don't know, maybe it was published by Democrats. I assume, I've noticed that you tend to go right to Snopes. You tend to go to the most outrageous Democrat propaganda machines because they're anxious for Trump to be wrong about this. I honestly have come
I just Google. I just fucking Googled it.
Okay, and who did you get on Google?
I got. Hold on. I got. What is this? This is just one person who I assume. It's called Creaky Joints. I believe it's just one person's blog. It's somebody named Lauren Gelman. So, all right, she's not an authoritative source. She's not fucking Johns Hopkins. But I can Google around some more. She's somebody with rheumatoid arthritis who takes this shit, I assume.
Okay. Well, Rick, I will leave you to wander around in the swampy nether regions trying to figure out why this is not going to work, and that's fine. But let me go on. But by the way, I want to reiterate, I've noticed that the Democrats don't seem to want to believe this, and it's possible that I think a basic pathological fear and mistrust of Trump. I honestly, as I said last week, I think if Nancy Pelosi said this worked, Rick wouldn't need to argue with me about every single thing about hydroxychloroquine. It's now.
It's fucking viruses are hard. Am I muted or not fucking muted? All right, viruses. But give me a fucking second. Viruses are harder than bacteria to kill because viruses pretty much aren't alive. There are a bunch of antiviral therapies, but they're not as effective as antibiotics because viruses aren't really alive, so you can't fucking kill them. So the idea that it's natural to think that to want to wait for data to show up as to whether this shit's going to work and to what extent it will work. And that's what I've been saying the whole time. Let's see some actual fucking data. And some of the data is coming out, and it's showing that consistent with an antiviral agent, it's decent at knocking down inflammation, but it's not a dead solid. You remember when we were fucking kids and we got strep throat, and you'd go to the doctor and he'd stick penicillin and stick you in the ass with a needle full of penicillin, and boom, you were over it in like 14 hours. It just killed the shit dead. That's not what happens with viruses. It's tougher to knock them down. All right, I'm muting. Give me a sec there.
Okay, well, all of the studies that were done, and I guess I have to remind Rick that the world's foremost virologist, Didier Raoult, and several New York doctors, almost a month ago, found that it was dramatically reducing the viral load in the patient. So the patient was getting less and less of the viruses as they took the hydroxy. Now, right now, as we speak, there are thousands and thousands of Americans taking chloroquine, both in controlled studies that were approved by the FDA. I bet you didn't know that, Rick. The FDA actually approved a study.
I fucking know that. I'm not stupid. I read the stories. Yeah, there are a bunch of studies going on right now. I know that.
The FDA, have you muted? The FDA has said that this can be used as an emergency, has emergency approval. What Trump said this morning was everybody had to agree not to sue anybody if it didn't work. That was the big hurdle. That was what was keeping the FDA and the doctors and the hospitals and the politicians. They all had to agree. They all had to have a paper so that the patient could sign it and say, I'm not going to sue anybody. Give me the fucking stuff. And so now thousands of Americans are taking this. Now I want to go on because this is getting tiresome. Rick said he knew all about where the virus was coming from and that, I don't know, well, I don't even remember why he was disputing me. Oh yeah, because I had made the outrageous claim that the Chinese may have created this virus. And I'm going to refer you to a fellow named Ezra Levant, who has a show in Canada. And he studied where the virus, which kind of bat actually comes with the coronavirus. The kind of bat that gets this virus doesn't exist in those wet markets in Wuhan. So it turns out that the kind of bat that has this virus was gathered up in a completely different province of China. And that, but the important thing is, it was gathered up. Now, let me explain. The Chinese are the leaders in the study of animal-driven viruses. And they send scientists into caves in order to collect viruses from bats. And it turns out that the virus that we have comes from a bat that doesn't come from wet markets. And furthermore, the suggestion that investigative scientists are making, people that investigate the origins of epidemics, the suggestion is that this virus either spilled out of a lab that was studying it, possibly in Wuhan, where they have a massive virus studying facility, or it was deliberately released.
Ezra Levant of Rebel News, the fearless source of news, opinion, and activism that you won't find anywhere else. I'm sure he's an expert on this shit. He's so.
Knowing that that unfair people like yourself would try to belittle his credentials, he actually played a documentary on his show, which I saw. It was subtitled, but it was published by the Chinese government, about the incredible work they're doing studying viruses that come from bats. They were so proud of it that they actually had scientists talking about the work they were doing going into caves, and I saw this in the show, where these Chinese scientists were going into caves and getting viruses out of bats. And this particular documentary vanished from the internet. So no matter how carefully you look for it, Rick, you won't be able to find it except on Ezra Levant's show, but it is a publication of the People's Republic of China, not Ezra Levant. and I think it's damn suspicious that they were taking this virus to Wuhan, where they've got a massive facility, and that somehow it got to America.
All right, that's just fucking stupid, but okay. You listen to conservative, like fucking, they used to call it lunatic fringe. Maybe they still do. You listen to a lot of this stuff, and I mean, sure, there's always a possibility that some conspiracy is true, but when you look historically at conspiracies, like 1% turn out in the final thing to be true. Like that, of all the fucking conspiracies that have been postulated, like the one that fucking the CIA was involved with fucking moving crack to finance some of its shit. That thing turned out to be true. But just about every other fucking conspiracy the last 30 years turns out to be garbage. Okay. Yeah, fucking.
Well, I actually do have some independent, besides the film that I saw that was published by the People's Republic of China, I actually have a common sense proof of what I'm saying, and here it is. We know for certain that the Chinese knew that they had this in the fall of 1919. At the very least in the winter of 1919, and they covered it up. We know for certain that they murdered doctors that had the audacity to try to report this. So it seems to me that a government that would murder...
1919? Wait a minute, you're fucking things up. You meant 2019, right? Because you're talking about a whole different...
Yeah, yes, 2019. So in other words, last year, before anybody had even heard of this, we know the Chinese were dealing with this. And we know that they covered it up, and we know that they murdered people to cover it up. So I don't really think it's that crazy a conspiracy to think that a government that would murder its own people to keep this secret might have actually accidentally released it or did it on purpose.
All right.
I mean, I wouldn't put anything past them.
We know they're an authoritarian government. We know that they're probably massaging their numbers right now, that they're covering up, that they, right now, China claims to have had 82,000 cases and 3,300 total deaths. Those numbers are probably low. You're right about that shit. Now, I haven't heard that they were murdering doctors. I heard that the guy who really was the whistleblower on it caught the fucking shit and died from it. But that doesn't mean that they fucking engineered the virus.
They didn't engineer it. They got it from a bat. Bats carry infinite numbers of viruses, and the Chinese are, one of their greatest things that they do is they study viruses that come from animals, and they know that they didn't have to engineer it. They got a vial of it from a bat.
Yes.
I can't hear your response.
Because I was fucking muted. No, but no, I thought you were talking. You talk.
All right, go ahead.
No, I made my point. It's your turn.
All right, then mute.
I am.
Okay, so I don't know why Rick doesn't want to respond. As I say, you did not have to engineer this virus. All they have to do is go into a cave, get a bat, and drain it out of a bat. I mean, it's in there already. Now, they've got vials of the stuff. In China, they have vials of this coronavirus that they got from bats. All they had to do was spill it, and this would have happened. And I think
so we're not fighting. Okay, so we can agree there's a possibility that some science guy fucked up. That happens in every fucking movie or in all the shitty movies about pandemics. It's some guy in some lab spills it, and then all of a sudden everybody in the lab is dead, and then some dog licks a puddle in front of the lab, and then all of a sudden everybody in that city's dead. So yeah, it could have been some kind of fuck up like that. I'm just saying that it's probably not a weaponization, that they didn't weaponize it and set it loose to fuck us up.
At this time, I don't know if you're aware of this, Rick, but it's the easiest country in the world to get an organ, if you need an organ transplant, is China. It takes months and months and months, sometimes a year, 5 years, to get an organ if you need one in America. But in China, you can get an organ within weeks. We're talking about a heart, a kidney, anything you need. And the reason is that the government dismembers their undesirable population. And I think nothing that the Chinese have done to this country is worse than concealing this virus from us and letting thousands and thousands of their people come here and give it to us. I can't prove that they did it on purpose. My point is that there's going to have to be a reckoning. Whether you did this on purpose or not, we deserve to have trillions of dollars in reparations for them hiding and covering it up.
All right, so let's have it. That's what at the top of the show I was calling for a reckoning. Let's have fucking hearings. It doesn't have to be just about the coronavirus response in the U.S. because yeah, the Chinese probably dawdled a little. They delayed, I think, telling the world for 3 weeks, but then fucking our government had their own delays for 7 or 8 weeks. So let's fucking have hearings. Let's have hearings into China. Let's have hearings into what happened in America. Let's fucking have people up before Congress in their masks fucking answering questions about what the fuck went right, because you're big on the one thing that Trump did early, which is the partial travel ban from China. You're saying that stopped a fucking disaster. Maybe so, but let's fucking have hearings and figure out what works and what doesn't, so that if it goes away, we get a respite, or even if it doesn't, when it comes back or when it keeps going, we know better about what to do and about distribution networks and supply chains and all that shit. And if China's very much the bad guy, I mean, we know it started there. We know they dawdled at least for several weeks before making a big deal out of it. We think they're probably massaging their numbers. Let's fucking find out. That's what you do with hearings. Or at least with hearings, you have people get up there and they say to the nation, well, here's instead of on fucking Ezra Levant's like Action News Network, you have somebody in front of Congress being cross-examined about about the shit that's going on. Okay.
Well, I think it's actually very important. This leads me to my most important point, because in the end, all that Rick can do is try to point the finger at Trump being dawdling. That's what he's been doing for 3 weeks. You've accused Trump of waiting too long and doing the wrong thing and being incompetent. But I would just like to say the most important thing I learned about the Democrat Party's response is that Joe Biden accused Trump of being a racist and a xenophobe for for doing the most important thing he did, which was quarantining China. So in other words, Rick, I can already point the finger. That's what these hearings are going to be for, just to point the finger at Trump. And my argument is, I already know who did a good job. Trump did a good job. The Republicans have done a fine job under the circumstances. And Biden was a doddering, senile imbecile who said that Trump should not have quarantined China. Now, Rick is always fact-checking everything I say while I speak. So he's probably found that 2 days ago, Biden came around and said, yeah, it was a good thing to quarantine China. So he waited since January to come up with that, Rick. I'm way ahead of you. But if it was up to Biden, there would have been no quarantine of China. In fact, the southern border would be wide open because Pelosi had tried to put into the relief the package of money we were going to give to coronavirus victims and the stimulus to the economy. In that package, Pelosi tried to put in a little thing that was going to abolish ICE. She was going to abolish the immigration control agency. So my point is that the Democrats would have left the country wide open for illegal immigrants from all over the world, including China. And they would have officially allowed as much immigration as wanted to come here from China, as well as south of the border.
All right.
So I already know who to blame.
All right. So I went to PolitiFact. I'm sure most of the fact, you tell me a fact-checking source. Like, you don't trust Snopes. I'm sure you don't trust PolitiFact. So you can give me who do you conservatives go to fact-check shit besides fucking Hannity? Anyway, PolitiFact says, Trump said this. Speaking of his restriction on travel from China, Trump says, I had Joe Biden calling me xenophobic. He called me a racist because of the fact that he felt it was a racist thing to stop people from China coming in. PolitiFact rates that as mostly false and says Biden has not directly said that the restrictions were xenophobic. Around the time the Trump administration announced the travel restriction, Biden said that Trump had a record of hysteria, xenophobia, and fear-mongering. Biden used the phrase xenophobic in reply to a Trump tweet about limiting entry to travelers from China, and in which Trump described the coronavirus as the Chinese virus. So Biden did not spell out which part of Trump's tweet was xenophobic. All right, so anyway. But wait a second. Do you have a fact-checking source? That's an actual question for you.
Okay. First of all, my fact-checking source is I don't listen to idiots that just make up an argument. You know, I didn't even have to read that. I knew it was going to be stupid. Trump, when Trump closed down China, there was no call for Biden to use words like hysteria, fear-mongering, and xenophobia. So, Rick, are you dumb enough to believe what you just read? I mean, this is a question for you. I go to a variety of neutral sources. I go to the Wall Street Journal. I go to I like the Washington Times. I like Fox. I like Breitbart. I like I don't know, dozens of other.
None of those are fucking neutral sources. I would give you Drudge. Okay. You didn't even go Drudge. Fucking Drudge is what? I can say shit. You just did Fox, Breitbart, Washington Times, all of them fucking conservative. Nothing that and nothing that's a fact-checking deal. Nothing that takes statements and facts checks them.
Can I respond?
Sure.
All right. So my point is this. I made a point a minute ago that Biden had not favored quarantining China and had called Trump xenophobic. And then you read me this shit from your left-wing source where it actually quotes Biden using the word xenophobia, fear-mongering, and hysteria. And that is supposed to convince me, oh yeah, you're right, Rip. Biden was for quarantining China all along. And he was right there with the president, not accusing him of racism at all. So, in other words, what bothers me is you're supposed to have a higher IQ than me, and you read me this shit, and now you believe it. You think, oh, that's right, Biden was being more than fair. Is that, I mean, you haven't disproven my fact at all.
To the extent that Biden was calling, and it's not clear what he was, but to the extent that he was calling the travel ban itself hysteria, Biden was wrong. So now whether it was effective is another thing, but no, it wasn't. He was wrong in calling that, but there was plenty of other stuff that anyway.
All right.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Since Rick doesn't have anything more to add, I just wanted to say this. I actually had to call the goddamn police department because I was going to go out and do some landscape. I was going to go out and paint a landscape alone. Actually, I was going to bring a friend who was going to sit 6 feet away from me in a deserted landscape. And the police in Los Angeles said I couldn't do it, that I would be, I would have to that I would be cited. And I said, cited? What does that mean? And the lady said, the police officer said, you'd have to go to court and appear before a judge. And I said, what are the guidelines? And she said, that'd be up to the judge. But you can't, I said, so I can't go outside and paint a landscape in Los Angeles? No. Because there were 350 deaths in a state the size of Iraq with 40 million people in it. 340 people die, and I can't leave the goddamn studio? This is what I'm saying. This is like I needed another reason to hate Democrats. They're fucking crazy. You know what? I swore I was worried that I might be too drowsy today. But the more I think about it, the more infuriated I become. There is no justification to keep 40 million people from being able to go outside and paint a landscape. But these Democrats are insane. And the truth is that when you've only had 350 people die in a population of 40 million people, you do not have a crisis. You have a better than normal flu season.